About a week ago, I was chilling inside my newly built home near the outskirts of Terrytown, located at 777 Quack Drive, zip code 49444, when I was approached by a rather fashionable lad who claimed to be part of an organization called the Dungeon Inspections and Checkups Committee, otherwise known as DIC. And they said, hey, since you've completed all the temples in the game, would you like to come work with us and give us your thoughts on them? And I said, butter my biscuit, go suck a duck. Of course I'm down. I've got plenty of complaints. When do I start? And he said, right now. So I started writing my report, and here's what I wrote. Also, spoiler warning for the dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom. Easily the biggest issue I had with Breath of the Wild was the dungeons in the game. I never thought I'd find myself inside a giant elephant, but here I am. They were awful. I mean, at least the gimmick of moving different parts of the dungeon was interesting, but thematically they were boring and all of the Blight bosses sucked. So when Tears of the Kingdom was announced, I had one big wish in mind. Please bring back the traditional themed dungeons with unique boss fights, and at least throw the word temple in the title of it so I feel like I'm playing a Zelda game. Thankfully, my wishes were answered. Kind of. So while I do think that the dungeons in this game were a major step up from the ones in Breath of the Wild, I'm not fully satisfied with all of them. But the one in particular that I want to talk about today is the Water Temple. I'm just gonna get this out of the way right now. This was easily, in my opinion of course, the worst dungeon in Tears of the Kingdom, not counting the Spirit Temple, and dare I say, one of my least favorite dungeons in all the Zelda games I've played. Still better than Divine Beasts though. I'm gonna start off by mentioning the good thing about this dungeon. There's only one good thing. The music. The music was beautiful, and it was actually my favorite out of all the temples in the game. Oh, that's so good. But that's it. I pretty much disliked everything else, so let's talk about it. The lead up to this dungeon was way better than the dungeon itself. You gotta dive into this whirlpool, and suddenly you're in this musty, moist cave under the water. You gotta unclog some pipes to change the water levels so you can get to the terminal in the middle. Or you can just build a huge bridge. The puzzle of the waterworks wasn't unique, but at least the location of it felt interesting and kind of mysterious. The way I see it, the Zora Waterworks were almost an extension of the Water Temple itself, but since it's not technically the Water Temple, I'm not gonna count it into the Water Temple's design. Instead of a temple below a whirlpool, we got some big old floating platforms with some giant pitchers for some reason. So my absolute biggest gripes with this dungeon were the setting and the theme of it. The whole time I was up there, I was just wondering, why isn't it underwater? Like, just because Sky Islands were introduced into the game doesn't mean you have to have 2 temples in the sky. 3 if you include the Temple of Time. The problem for the Zora was that there was all this sludge polluting their water, so why not have it so that there's a giant underwater plumbing system or something that's causing all the sludge, and make it a temple that's actually based in the water like a water temple should be. Basically the Zora Waterworks, but made into a proper temple. Or maybe do what they did with Garandia and have some sort of lost Zora city that's deep in the ocean and call it Zoralantis or something. They could have reintroduced the iron boots like how they were used in Ocarina of Time, and then made it so that the Zora armor gives you faster, more agile swimming like in Majora's Mask, and then make puzzles revolve around that, but with also using the new abilities, of course. Or you might hate the idea of using iron boots again. You might be saying, ah, you only like it because it's nostalgic, not because it's fun or good. And yeah, you might be right, but I mean, those ideas are just me spitballing and essentially redoing what was already done in previous games. But I think with newer technology and with this new overworld, they had the chance to add an underwater exploration aspect and improve the swimming of the game, but they didn't. Even if it is a repeat of what was already done, I still think it'd be more interesting than what we got. And that idea could be scrapped as a whole. You don't have to have iron boots or underwater swimming. The main thing I wanted was a water temple in a proper setting with a proper theme. So that's my biggest issue with the newest Water Temple. One thing that I think the newest Zelda games have tried to do was to pay homage to the previous Zelda games, and this temple didn't do that at all. We got an open, empty feeling area where you can see almost every puzzle in one frame if you're standing in the right spot, which removes any sort of mystery or sense of wonder about it for me. Since it was my first dungeon in the game, I forgot to activate the terminal at the beginning of it, so when I'd completed the puzzles, I didn't have Sidon's water ability, so I spent over an hour just wondering what the hell to do with the water wheels. That's not the game's fault though, that's my own idiot brain's fault. The thing is, if I just activated that terminal at the beginning, I probably would have completed this dungeon in like 15 minutes tops. It was just too easy. I know Ocarina of Time's Water Temple was a massive pain in the ass, but I definitely prefer the feeling of being genuinely confused in a dungeon and then eventually figuring it out and then getting that sweet, juicy feeling of accomplishment afterward. I like getting lost and getting stumped and having to think, and that's something that I think all the dungeons in this game are kind of lacking on, but maybe it's just because I've gotten older and better at figuring out puzzles over time. But I also think it's because of the formula of the game. Also, I guess it's worth mentioning the low gravity aspect of the Water Temple, which was alright. It kind of lost its novelty for me really quickly, so I don't have too much to say about it. And then you've got the dungeon's boss, which was, again, alright, and it felt more tedious tedious than fun to me, but I didn't hate it. I'd like to have seen maybe a giant sludge monster and you have to use Sidon's power or hydrants to wash off segments of sludge on him so you can then expose his weak spots and attack him. But we just got this goofy little dude instead, and it felt more like I was abusing a child rather than defeating a powerful boss that was plaguing an entire race by polluting their water. But in reality, I didn't mind this boss design. It was the least of my complaints about the water temple, and I don't think a goofy boss is a bad thing, but I do think it could have been something more special. I don't want to sound too whiny because I still definitely enjoyed Tears of the Kingdom, and I enjoyed the dungeons a lot more than I did in Breath of the Wild, but this water temple was just disappointing to me. I know a lot of you are going to disagree, and that's okay because I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on it, but I just can't help but feel a little let down from this part of the game, even if these dungeons were thematically better than Divine Beasts. I am appreciative of the fact that we sort of got traditional temples back, but I do think that they still need plenty of tweaking. And that concludes my report about the water temple. Hey, yeah, this is good, but we have a policy for a minimum word count of 1250. You're only at 1249. Oh, shit.